With Rodrygo's future at Madrid in the headlines again, do you think he's ready to be the main man of an elite European club like Bayern or Arsenal?
I suppose this is an interesting way of framing it, isn't it? Because I guess because he's coming from Real Madrid and because the perception is that he's finding it difficult to find space there, there's that sense of where can he be the main guy? A bit like, and it's always about status, isn't it? A little bit like when Neymar left Barcelona, for example. This can be his team. He can be the main guy. If he was going to Arsenal, just for example, would he be the main guy in a place that's Bukayo Saka's team?
Yeah, exactly. It's Bukayo Saka's the main guy, but he could be a main guy. Like I think no one at Arsenal.
I'm looking forward to your sales pitch on behalf of Arsenal.
Just coming in.
I'm not buying it from Rodrygo. I've got to be honest.
My openly known support of Arsenal is too hard to hide. But look, Bukayo Saka is the guy at Arsenal. You don't get to show up at Arsenal and be the guy. Almost if you're anyone, but certainly I think Rodrygo is not at the status where he could walk in and in fans' minds at least.
Does he need to be the guy?
No, I don't think he does. And I think that actually I could see lots of reasons why Arsenal could be a good fit. Obviously, there's an immediate question of people are going to look at that and go, well, Rodrygo plays off the right at Real Madrid. How would that work with Saka? But I think in reality he plays on the right in Real Madrid because he was the only one who would, frankly, at a certain point, because everyone else wanted to play on the left, and I think he could easily switch back to the left, and I don't think that would be a big problem. I think he's got that versatility in him. I don't know if I think it's the number one thing that Arsenal most need to address, but we're getting off the on the continent brief, which is what we actually should be talking about here. I think Rodrygo is a really, really talented footballer who has quite clearly in recent times been bristling a bit at being somewhat the forgotten member of that group in the Madrid attack. There was a whole thing at the start of last season where Marco putting out headlines talking about the BMV, which was Bellingham, Mbappe and Vinicius, and somehow just forgetting that Rodrygo was there, which I think there was a bit of a social media story where he posted something then took it down again because he was annoyed about it. Then, of course, he doesn't get onto the 50-name long list for the Ballon d'Or, and he's not happy about that either. And I think he is definitely ready to feel like the main guy, or at least a main guy somewhere. And I think that at Arsenal he would have more of that than you would in the attack at Real Madrid, where clearly, and even more now that Alonso has come in, isn't using him. Clearly he is a bit the odd player out. Do I think he's good enough? I have a hunch, and maybe this is just applying like precedent falsely, but I have a hunch that whoever gets him this season is going to get a very, very good season out of him, because it happens all the time with players from Real Madrid. It happened with Wesley Sneijder when he went to Inter. It happens with Gonzalo Higuain when he left. You get these players who are very good footballers who have not got to be celebrated in the way that they probably could have been, and they get to step outside with a chip on their shoulder and they go and do something. I think he could be that this season.
I think the other point to make about Rodrygo is him going is not a given. Because Real Madrid, whether he can get in their 11 or not, which is still a question that is yet to be answered for this coming season, because I think he is very much Xabi Alonso's cup of tea. Mobile, intelligent, adaptable forward who like works unbelievably hard. So I don't think him going is a given. The other thing is the club realise what a valuable asset he is. They're not going to give him away. It's going to cost a lot of money to get him out of Real Madrid. So who is prepared to pay that, I suppose? There are only a very small amount of clubs who can, and there are even smaller amount of clubs who necessarily have a spot that they can give him. But I don't think it always does have to be the main spot. I think he can play anywhere in a front three. You're getting an enormous amount of finishing and chance creation off him as well. And bear in mind that, as Nicky says, this is a story that's got roots way, way back. If you look at the 2024 Champions League final, it really annoyed Real Madrid actually by, in the days leading up to that final at Wembley, given a couple of interviews which gave varying degrees it was perceived of his commitment to Real Madrid. So in one, he said, well, if I'm not considered a main guy, I think he said to ESPN Brazil, I'm going to have to consider my options. Now, since then, of course, he was really good, particularly in the first half of last season, and they thought, yeah, he's valuable, and maybe if there's someone else if there's someone who's got to be squeezed as a forward, maybe it's not him, maybe it's even Vinicius. If there's a potential positional clash between him and Kylian Mbappe, as everyone was looking at it at the time. Now, I guess the reason that there's a bit of a change is not just because of Xabi Alonso coming in, it's because of the fact that it's widely believed that Vinicius Junior has already signed a new contract at Real Madrid rather than going off to Saudi, and that will be announced at the end of the Club World Cup. So that's where it seems like we are. So again, it feels that Real Madrid are maybe a bit top heavy, that maybe they have to create a little bit of space in the squad. All remains to be seen, and remains to be seen how much money Xabi Alonso would like to reshape the squad. Like I said, I don't think it's a given that he goes. One, because I think there are very, very few realistic destinations, and two, because I think once Xabi Alonso gets the chance to work with him, whether it's possible or not, I think he'll want to keep him.
Just to come back very quickly to the question, because I do think that main guy framing is interesting, or main man framing. Like, I think one thing that is like easy to underestimate because they're Real Madrid and because they always do well in Europe and they've got so many players scoring so many goals, but it's 4 seasons in a row he scored 5 goals in the Champions League, which is not like, it's not the number that makes your eyes pop, but doing it every season, actually, like, look at a team like Arsenal and when they got to crunch time in the Champions League, they were screaming out for just someone who could score a goal. Like, I think
it's more than useful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Fred, in answer to your question, I think that was a yes. I know it sounded a lot longer than that, but honestly, it was a yes from both Nicky and from Andy. This question from Jacob on Instagram: is Juventus the best next step for Jonathan David after leaving Lille? We made Jonathan David famous, I think, here on OTC. So, obvious question to you, is it the obvious next step for him?
I hate to be this person. I just worry that any player going to Juventus, I worry about where their career is about. I mean, just think about Dusan Vlahovic when he was going there and how positive his career trajectory seemed to be, and it's 70 million euros later, and a lot of frustration. Has it worked out? Not really. And you can't judge Igor Tudor's Juventus on the basis of every past Juventus. Igor Tudor's just getting started. Maybe he'll be able to take them in a different direction. There is a lot of interesting young talent at Juve. There's a lot of players there who they could build something with. You look at players like Yildiz, who I think is starting to show what he's capable of. But I just worry. I worry because we got Thiago Motta going in there last season and everyone was thinking, myself included, okay, now they've finally got a manager who's a bit more of a creative thinker, who's going to do something. And it almost felt like the Juventus just sucked the energy out of him and made him into the same boring 0-0 draw purveyor as everyone else who's there. But maybe this is finally the season where that'll change a bit.
I think that's always the question with Juventus. And I think we always talk about, when we talk about a club developing players, we think of players who are under 23. But it shouldn't just be like that in football, and especially not for a guy like Jonathan David, who's in his mid-20s, who's proven that he's capable of mixing it at elite level. We've seen that in the Champions League. He's brilliant in the Champions League for Lille last season, and he's been relentlessly consistent for them over a number of seasons. But to say that at his age, he doesn't need further developing, everyone needs developing. And I think there has to be a recognition of that. And going back to Nicky's point, the concern about Juventus and what they need to change, a little bit like a sort of Italian Manchester United, although maybe not such an extreme version. I was going to make that comparison, but I'm glad you did rather than me. Yeah, that's right. I'll get the nasty messages, not you. They've been very bad at developing players. In recent years and helping them reach their full potential. So that is a concern. A lot of that rests on Tudor, and I wonder if he's like, he might be the right coach to do that, because it's clear that he's so demanding of his players. So with I was going to say a full preseason, a fullish preseason, of course, with the Club World Cup, maybe that's something that will work out. But I think there's a lot to like about David. He's really improved as the years have gone by. He's become a much more complete player. I'm really interested to see how he does link with Kenan Yildiz. And I think if you're looking for someone who suggests that Juventus might be able to buck that trend of not developing players, maybe Yildiz is an exceptional talent and he's not like representative of any particular trend. But I think the way that he's coming on is very, very promising for them. And I think someone like him who has been fated since quite an early age, who's seen as a standard bearer for the young talent at Juventus, and because really they didn't have anyone else in the team who could do what he did last season, I felt that a lot of unfair pressure was piled onto him. And even though he had a couple of dry spells in front of goal, he never stopped taking responsibility on the field. And that to me is what marks him out as a future great. He never hid. And I think it would have been so easy for him to hit a wall where it got to the point where they had to leave him out of the team. And in the really difficult bits of last season, he toughed it out. So for me, it feels like going forward, Juventus, whatever shape they take, will be Kenan Yildiz's team. And I think him and David, who's super intelligent, could be a really nice link up.
Well, let's stay in Italy. Kind of stay in Italy, it being the left boot of Europe. Let's have one foot in Asia and one foot in Italy, if you see what I mean. Because this question from Luca on Blue Sky: what has attracted Tammy Abraham, remember him, to the Turkish Super League, and how do you think he'll get on under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at Besiktas?
I think there's probably lots of things that have attracted him to the league. It's been a fun, competitive league at the top end in the last few seasons. Certainly an attackers league, I'd say, at the top end. And I think there's likely to be a lot of enthusiasm, which maybe is what he needs after a couple of seasons, which have not been very enthusiastic. He obviously tore his cruciate at Roma, and I think has never really been the same player since that. Got the time on loan at Milan last season, and you saw little glimpses here and there of the Tammy we saw before that. But I think probably the overriding thing that I don't want to speak for him. I'm sure he'll have his own explanations, but my best interpretation and expectation, I think, of where he has been in his career after that injury is probably just really needs a fresh start. And I think was looking for that at Milan. And Milan was a complicated place last season. They changed managers in the season. Obviously, you had, I think, a pretty toxic changing room where you've got players who should be your leaders and the ones who are your senior figures in players like Leao and Theo Hernandez at the beginning of the season, just openly disrespecting Fonseca, who was the manager at the time, and not even coming over to be on the same side of the pitch as their teammates during a cooling break. The atmosphere was not good. So I think that for any player, that club posed a lot of challenges last season. Only a few players within that managed to show their best, really, probably just Pulisic and Reinders, I would say, last season. So he seeking a fresh start makes sense, seeking it somewhere where I imagine perhaps I'm making assumptions on the basis of the fan base, but I imagine he'll get a fairly enthusiastic reception there. I think that stuff I would imagine would appeal. Whether or not Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is the manager to get you going again in your career, I have maybe more questions about.
Don't open up that can of worms just yet, okay, because I'm going to pose it to Andy.
Yes.
Okay.
In terms of the reception, he did something that I've not seen a player do before. He got the shirt on while he was still on the private jet. So not for Tammy is they're coming off the plane just holding the scarf. He was wearing the shirt as well. I mean, that is smarts, I think. Very, very emotionally skilled there.
But footballing wise, is it a smooth transition from Serie A to the Super League? Or how does he change his football to
the footballing wise is a really good question, because I guess a lot of people don't watch the Turkish Super League on a regular basis, and I think it might come as a shock to him just how physical it is. And that's going to test him, particularly with, as Nicky was saying, the injuries that he's had over the last couple of years, and the fact that he wasn't first choice for Milan. And in truth, he was never really going to be first choice for Milan going into last season. If there's a positive to take into this, if you're Besiktas and you're Tammy Abraham, I think people will go, oh, well, he only scored 3 Serie A goals last season. He got into double figures in all competitions, despite not being a starter. And I think if you ask people at Milan, no one is knocking his work rate. He was really implicated. And on the occasions I saw him in the flesh last season, there was no one on the pitch working harder than him, which I think is testament to him and how much he wanted to make it work and how much at this point he wants to make himself a serious player again. I think they will get more out of him than they were getting out of Ciro Immobile, who started really well, but I think it was felt, especially when they didn't have the ball, whether he's just not that capable of being implicated. You know, I don't know, but I didn't feel that he was when times were difficult for them, and I think they'll get a bit more of that from Tammy Abraham, even if he's clearly an inferior finisher to Ciro Immobile.
It is worth opening up that can of worms, though, because remember when he arrived at Roma under Jose Mourinho, it was a perfect fit, wasn't it? And he was flying. And I wonder whether Ole Gunnar Solskjaer can work the magic that helped Tammy Abraham, light up the Serie A at the beginning of that season when he started.
One of Mourinho's great talents is because he's so charismatic, he does get under players' skin and he makes them want to believe in themselves, frankly, when he's at his best. Mourinho makes people think that they can be the best version of themselves.
And it was definitely the case with Abraham.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think when you listen to Abraham talking in those interviews when he was with Mourinho at Roma, Mourinho had clearly made him feel like he was believed in, and that was making him believe in himself. And I don't feel that necessarily I've seen Solskjaer have that impact on players yet in his managerial career, but also lots of coaches, just like lots of players, have chapters and phases in their career, and maybe we'll see something different. I don't want to presume on that, but I do think Mourinho himself has to be considered when we talk about Abraham's time at Roma, because it was certainly a part of it.
I like this question from Brennan on email. Thank you, Brennan. What level do you think Jarrell Quansah can get to under Erik ten Hag at Bayer Leverkusen?
I would like to think a really good level. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I think this is an enormous get for Leverkusen. For them to be in a position now, and of course they're flush with the Florian Wirtz money, we realise that, but for them to attract a guy who can start games for the best team in the Premier League to their club, I think shows how far Bayer Leverkusen have come in the last couple of years. To make themselves that attractive. This was a signing that I don't think they could have made, not just financially, in terms of attracting the player. This is not a signing they could have made pre-Xabi Alonso, and it shows how much Xabi Alonso has done to change the perceptions of Leverkusen internationally. They needed someone to build the defence around after Jonathan Tah went, who's been a great leader for them for a number of years. I'm, as I've said before, like relatively optimistic for Ten Hag. Now, clearly, there's been a mini exodus. He's going to have to reshape the team. There might be more players that go. There are going to be a few more coming in. So, quite what level of Leverkusen we're going to get this season is a question. But Quansah is a signing you make when you're intending to be a challenger. He's not a signing you're making to just tread water, I think, in the Bundesliga or in the Champions League. So everything there is set for Quansah to develop himself. I think Ten Hag, well, he's enormously respected in Germany still. He's going back to the Manchester United, Juventus thing. He's a better coach than the back end of United suggested. I think is fair to say. I think if you look at everything at Leverkusen is set for players to get the best out of themselves. It's quite a sort of simple environment. Like Köln's the big city next door, and Leverkusen, everything's about the game. So you've got the stadium and the training ground right next to each other. It's like your own little football mini world where you can just concentrate on that. There are very few places in football where you can just get on with it with no distractions. And I feel it's really one of those super professional environment, and still a really good squad with some good senior players, particularly as it looks as if they're holding on to Granit Xhaka.
See, that question from Brennan, Nicky, it dovetails so neatly into this question from James on Instagram. For me, it's almost a comparative study. When James asked, what should Como be aiming for next season? Is it too early for a Champions League push under Cesc Fabregas? And we know that Cesc Fabregas was being touted with, several of the major coaching jobs in Europe. He stayed at Como. Once upon a time, lowly Como, I think it might have been fair to say, no longer that. But is it too early for them to be aiming that high?
I don't think it's necessarily too early. There's a lot of uncertainty with a lot of the clubs that are towards the top of Serie A from this season. You think about Inter have changed manager, you think about Roma have changed manager, you think about Atalanta, finally the end of the Giampiero Gasperini era. So you're looking at some of the clubs that perhaps you used to have stable expectations for, that you're thinking maybe you're not quite sure where to set expectations for those clubs. Lazio changed manager as well. And Lazio can't spend money at the moment, which is its own big problem. And then you think about how close the race for that fourth Champions League spot was even this season, with Juventus getting there at the end of the season, but only after there'd been periods when it was Bologna who were ahead of them, when it was Lazio who were ahead of them, when it was Roma looking like they'd take that last spot. Even Fiorentina were in that conversation. So I don't think there's this clear-cut separation right now between the top four and everyone else. I think Como showed already last season that they could mix it in individual games with those clubs. And I think you've seen this summer that they are once again getting right out there and spending aggressively, with a headline signing already being Jesus Rodriguez from Real Betis, teenage winger, for, was it 27 million euros, I think, or 22 plus bonuses maybe. They've also signed Martin Baturina, who's a Croatia international, who again, I think he's 21 or 22 from Dynamo Zagreb, already has Champions League experience, already has international experience. They are being very clearly targeted in the way they are going out aggressively, signing interesting young talents, continuing to build a team that is young and hungry and has a lot of really fascinating attacking talent. The other big one, of course, isn't a new signing, but Nico Paz, who was one of my absolute favourite players to watch in Serie A this season. Well, Real Madrid had an option to bring him back for, I think, something paltry like 7 million euros this summer. They've decided not to do it. I think that means next summer they have to spend 8 million euros on the option they have. So that for them is just leaving him parked there.
Well, basically, they're going to buy him back to sell him at some point, aren't they? That's what's going to happen, isn't it?
But it's fantastic for Como. They have another season of him. And because he was
hugely important.
Yeah, such a good player. So I think that when you look at it all and you think, well, Fabregas has shown himself to be a smart manager. I don't know where the limit is this season. They were, I haven't got the table in front of me. I think they finished 10th, but again, that's 10th behind a cluster of clubs that maybe don't have that much between them. I absolutely expect them on current trajectory to be in the European conversation. Champions League's a push. There are some clubs ahead of them who've got a head start, but I don't think it's impossible this season. And I think that's, to be, for anyone who's not been paying attention, that is absolutely where they're aiming for and intending to get to, with the Hartono brothers, the richest owners in Serie A.
This is a question, because as smart as Cesc Fabregas is, he still needs the cash to back him up, doesn't he? But where does that money come from?
I guess there are two sides to this. I mean, they've got extraordinarily rich owners, and this matters a lot in the current Serie A context, because not a lot of those clubs have got an enormous amount of money. And you've seen that, I think, if you go back through the last couple of years of, and we're not just talking post-Calciopoli, where there was clearly a talent drain, but even now, you look at the fact that Serie A clubs are forced to trade furiously to meet FFP limits, to create latitude to sign new players and to get ones they don't want off the books. And Como are almost a bit separate from that. Now, I think if you look at the fact that they've created, I think what they've done is quite clever, because they're like, if we're going to be taken seriously, look at their international image. Look at some of the people they've got to inhabit the stands, like Keira Knightley, Michael Fassbender, people like that in a
small stadium.
Yes.
Not bringing in a huge amount of income.
A small stadium that they're going to expand, but they're making themselves, I guess they're trying to make themselves like moneyed Venezia, really. Give themselves this USP, which seems to be working quite well. The other part of the USP, of course, is Cesc Fabregas.
Yeah.
The fact that we can talk about them holding Nico Paz, which is really important, but holding Fabregas is massively important, because we talked about charisma and figureheads when Nicky was talking about Mourinho before. You talked about Fabregas needing to have the money. Without Fabregas, you can't spend the money, because to get those players to come, you need him. Players really gravitate to him. There's no doubt about that already. So regardless of what a good job he might have done for Roma, Leipzig, Leverkusen or whatever, Milan, to fight all those off, Como have done a really great job. Of course, part of that great job is the fact that they will be going, what financial backing are you going to find at another Serie A club that's here? You know, even Antonio Conte had to get the players out to get them to spend proper money this summer. Fabregas is getting none of that sort of resistance at all. And to be able to, I guess, going back to the heart of James's question, if there's a feeling that it's too early for a Champions League push, I think it's two-sided. One, because there's that log jam of teams, and it's really difficult to get a Champions League place. Like Roma would have got a Champions League place in any normal season because of the back end of the season that they had under Ranieri. They were brilliant. They couldn't quite get there because there's just too much traffic ahead of them. So I guess that's the question. The other question, and I'm not sure if this is a reasonable one, but because they've been so good at getting young talent, there's this question of, oh yeah, they're going to be the team in like 2-3 years' time. Or maybe that's now. I mean, you know, Jesus Rodriguez could fly straight away. We saw that already. They went to Betis and they got Diao, who has been fantastic for them in the time that he's been there already. And then you add Paz, you add Kakare, you add Baturini, you add the other players that are coming in. It might be a team for the future, but it could be a team for now as well.
Yeah, I think that's all really well said. I think there's a certain energy there that actually Fabregas is so... He's really charismatic when you see him coaching. And I think if anyone's going to get these young players to have that little bit of like, do you know what? Let's back ourselves. Let's go for it right now. I think he is the guy. And exactly as Andy said, I mean, look, he was pretty much number one on Inter's shortlist this summer. And the fact that he didn't even blink, he didn't even really stop to think about it, was like, nope, I'm staying where I am, tells you exactly which direction this club's headed in. They're not going to be the favourites, but I'll be interested to see what the bookies say for them getting into the top four this season, because I think it's very possible.
I'm also interested that like Keira Knightley's been invited and Michael Fassbender's been invited.
I know what's coming.
We've not been invited yet, have we?
Well, when you say we, I am intrigued though about this. The late Como effect, if you like, and Andy touched on it. The poor man's Venezia or the rich man's Venezia kind of thing. If you were the world's designated grocer, where would you get married? In Venice or in Lake Como? It's a good question.
Listen, I think neither of those is my style. I'd sooner get married in the town where my dad grew up, which is much more low key. But I don't think those would be my spot.
The question doesn't go to you, Andy.
Less tourists in Como.
The question doesn't go to you because it's time for you both to recommend a game of the week for our listeners to enjoy over the weekend, and for me and all. And don't forget the food that goes with it as well. We can't have a game of the week without having something to munch on. Who wants to go first?
I don't mind.
Go.
Yeah. I'm going with Euro 2025, France versus England women's football. This one because it's by far the game I'm most excited about in the weekend coming up. Clearly, the group of death in that tournament and the pick of the round. Certainly, France have been on such a roll under Laurent Bonardet, and he's made some bold choices coming into this tournament as well, leaving out the likes of Wendy Renard and Eugenie Le Sommer. I think it's going to be a really
for that reason, I might have to take the unprecedented action of ducking your game of the week. No Wendy Renard. I can't get over that.
I know. But yeah, obviously England coming in as defending champions. But we're on the continent, which is why I focus my answer on France rather than on England. But of course, I'm going to be cheering for Lionesses as well. And I know you want food, and I'm going to just.
You're not going English. You're not going for full English.
No,
I'm
going to be my absolute worst self, which is because it's in Switzerland, and because I don't actually know that much Swiss food, but there used to be a little Swiss place near where I used to live that did fondue. All I can think of is eating, going full goblin mode and eating a big pot of cheese to get started on a football tournament, which is a terrible idea, and you always feel bad about it the next day, but in the moment it's always worth it.
Having said that, the mice would rather go for the Toblerone, trust me. However, Andy, Nicky's gone for France v England. What are you going for as your game of the week?
I've gone for Paris Saint-Germain versus Bayern Munich, therefore proving myself a liar after last week and saying as long as there were European versus South American clashes, I would keep going for those. I just couldn't resist this because it's worthy of a Champions League final. Now, again, it draws a huge question over the Club World Cup because I think the fact that, Palmeiras and Fluminense and I guess even Al Ahly have kept going is like a positive thing for the tournament because, if it just becomes a sort of quasi-Champions League, I don't think that's a great thing. However, these are two teams who are serious, who I think have more to give in this tournament, especially PSG, because they could basically take the second half off against Inter. This is worthy of a Champions League final. These two are really good. I've heard a lot of people disrespect Bayern on the way to the final and say this isn't a great Bayern Munich side. I think it's fair to say that it's not the best ever Bayern Munich side, but still a pretty good one. And I think they particularly showed that in the game against Flamengo. It's a proper test for PSG as well. It's going to be played at Atlanta, which is a brilliant stadium. It's a brilliant sports city as well. So I think there's a lot to recommend this. I have a feeling that PSG could go on and make this a perfect year. So I think let's lean in to something Parisian for this, or something
Not
that
cheese.
I think
We've already had cheese.
No. You see, I don't do dairy, so that's never going to be an option for me in this or any other week. We're going to go for I think a bavette steak, something that has. Something that just
going to be the first week when I'm jealous of Andy's pick.
It could be right. I think we're going to go for the very lightest of seasoning. Maybe just a bit of rosemary and pepper. Like we're not cooking it for long. We're just putting it in the pan. We're flipping it over, getting it on the plate, and we're getting that with a nice salad. Maybe I might even break my current sort of carb thing and have a few chips there as well.
Don't overdo it. We have to remember there's a game to watch as well.
Watch, not exactly. To play in. It's fine for us.
That is true. So that's PSG versus Bayern. And when's that on?
Saturday, 5:00 UK time, which means that you should be putting your steak in the pan at about 4:58.
Goodness gracious.
And then you'll still be able to sit down in front of the telly.
You like to cut it fine. You like to,
like I said, not much
literally
cooking.
Sprinting.
Not much cooking. Seigneur, s'il vous plaît. So I think we'll just flip it, and then we'll get in front of the telly in time for the very, very long exit of the players from the tunnel.
Oh, very good, very good. And Nicky, when's France versus England on?
Well, that's at 8:00, and I'm a bit worried that you're not going to be ready for a pot of cheese 3 hours after your steak and chips. But give it a go. Let us know how you do, listeners.